believe it or not, which is asking the right question is actually the most important skill for us leaders. It's not actually having the answers. If I can just nail the question, the answer resides in this room. What I want to throw out to you is questions that are interesting questions. How should we navigate the remaining leg of this pandemic? The second is, what's the right way to plot the rebuild? And then the last is, where do I look for inspiration and reference? I actually trust brands more with my data. I'll leave you with, if you only took away one thing, is spend time with your team to figure out what the right question marketing is. And yeah, if there's one tip I have, is ask the right question. I think I've used my pandemic productively. First of all, it's great to see everybody. I think some of you all know that I've made a career change during the pandemic. I moved from working with Ashu at LinkedIn to work at Saavn in May 2020. So I joined a new company bang in the middle of the pandemic. I've never met anybody over there. I've done all my board meetings, everything Reliance style on GeoMeet. And there's one thing that I've learned during this period as well, because in addition to starting a new job, I worked through a PhD, which I'll be submitting by December. So I think I've used my pandemic productively. I remember talking to Ashu about this when I first started. But there's only one thing I learned with this PhD, believe it or not, which is asking the right question is actually the most important skill for us leaders. It's not actually having the answers. And as I was thinking about the 8 minutes, I realized that if I can just nail the question, the answer resides probably in this room. And so what I want to throw out to you is three questions that I think are interesting questions. And probably this took 80% of the time. So the first question was really, how should we navigate the remaining leg of this pandemic? Because we talk about it like it's omnipresent, but we're still in it. So how do we navigate the remaining leg? The second is, what's the right way to plot the rebuild? I don't know about you all, but we're back in planning. I'm back with a number on my head from my board on what they want. How do I even think about the assumptions that I should make towards that? I have no idea how to plan anymore. And then the last and the most interesting question to me is, where do I look for inspiration and reference? Because in the past, working for MNCs, the reference would be the global team, would give you some guidance, would give you some context. You'd look at other markets for best practices. None of us know. And for a market like India, where do we turn for what are the right references to figure out how to do this? So I don't have answers towards this, but what I do know is that to answer these three questions, which are plaguing me, and I'm sure some of these also affect you, is three things that I know these answers that are part of the new story. And if I don't incorporate these three aspects, I think I'm going to fail at answering the question. The first one is the fact that actually we still need to treat this period like a recession. And I remember many of you guys remember 2009, 2001, some of you maybe, when we talked about, for those of you in B2B, zero money marketing, like we've seen this story before where we had no money and large amount of accountability from the business to deliver results. Demos, how can you do it without budgets? And so this idea that we are actually planning marketing, we need to treat it like a recession, and the resources are not there. The buy-in to spend the money and make the investments on brand are not there. We have to do performance marketing, we have to show outcomes, we have to show sales. So whatever I come up with has to be done with a recession, not a pandemic mindset, but a recession mindset. So I need to go back to some of those examples. Some of you guys have lived through that, so it'd be interesting to see, can we dust off some of the strategies back from 2009, 10, 11 to reuse them right now to figure that out. One of those things that I know worked for me is this idea of outcome marketing, right? Which is that I can't necessarily say that everything that I spend is going to drive a sale, but I can account for how I spend it. I know where it goes, I know I'm tighter on my operations. And I think one thing that happened 10, 12 years ago is that all of us in marketing became better at operations. And we moved from demand generation to demand management, really thinking about our systems and where do our leads go and how long is the sales cycle and what's the cost per lead. All that stuff started actually in 2009. So first thing we got to figure out is some of the youngsters in the industry are still focused on CPC, CPMs, but everybody in this room, I don't need to pitch, that's not important. But I think we still are accountable to our boards to deliver outcomes. So that's one thing. The second one is this at-home consumer thing. Ashu talked about most of our teams are at home, they're also consumers. Nikhil talked about people being home and trying to do demos. But all of us have had terrible customer experiences. We've had terrible other experiences, but we've had an aspiration to buy something online that just doesn't show up. Or you don't know where it is. You don't know how to return it. It's out of stock. Somebody spends a ton of money on Facebook and then you order it and it doesn't exist, etc. How irresponsible, right? I always think about that marketer that spent that money on the Facebook ad. I clicked it, so they paid for it. And I never got to buy anything because they don't have the product. It's spending money to lose market share. So whatever we do has to solve for the complete customer experience. I think Nikhil gave some great examples about that. The third one is really around this idea of the walled gardens. And I think Tej is probably the person best to speak about this on what to do about moving on from the cookies. But I feel like it hasn't totally hit us. And I think as brand masters, and you guys know this, I've always talked about how important it is for us to be technologists, to ignore the changing stack, the ad stack, and not understand our data, and more importantly, not feel entitled to get our data from sales or operations, or no, that data is in CRM, or that data is in that place, or that's transactional data. That's not marketing's data. Marketing's data is our campaign data. I think this idea of boldly asking for undeterred access to all our data, to put it all together, access it in a way that actually allows us to deal with our customers differently with privacy and everything else, versus relying on our data sitting in the walled gardens and connecting the. Why is it that I signed up for Healthify and my partner is getting Healthify ads in the same house? Or I'm talking to my mother about today I'm ordering biryani and me getting an SMS for biryani within 30 minutes of that. Like, this is a problem, right? Because I think brands would do better with my data. I actually trust brands more with my data. And so I think that I don't have answers, but what I do know is that as we get into this planning season, as I do, if I don't solve for these three things, it actually requires us to think about how are we going to tackle some of these aspects. And the point that I'll leave you with, if you only took away one thing, is spend time with your team to figure out what the right question marketing is at. And I think that the teams are struggling because they're chasing solutions, they're chasing action, they want to show they're doing something to make a difference. But honestly, they need the right question from you. And yeah, if there's one tip I have, is ask the right question. Great, thanks.